When I talk to folks about game-based assessment, there are sort of two big reasons to think about it. The first is if you want to measure different constructs, right? Constructs being, something, anything that's the target that you're selecting people on. So it can be anything from specific technical skills, could be a construct, to, the soft skills or durable skills, to other types of cognition. There are some types of constructs. There's some things that we might want to measure that are just easier to do with a game or a scenario or a simulation as opposed to sort of a traditional pencil and paper test. And so one example that we measure here is systems thinking. I would argue systems thinking, while it's possible to measure with sort of more traditional methods, it's really much more effective to actually give people a system, in our case, a game, that they have to manage to see how they're able to think in a systemic way. The other reason is just measuring, the same constructs that you usually measure, but doing it differently. So that's really more about trying to make your assessment program more engaging, more entertaining, more fun. And that's, that sounds, at least my own background, spent a lot of time building assessment in the education space, including at the College Board where I helped redesign the SAT. I led the research and psychometrics team there a couple SATs ago. And in that space, honestly, the test takers or students are captive audience. They take the test because they have to. In the workplace, they're not, right? If your assessment pipeline is boring, if you put up too much friction, they'll go apply to somebody else. So making your assessment both, scientifically valid and reliable, but also engaging, ends up being really important when people can just vote with their feet and not stay in your funnel. A typical early career assessment, form or build version of the test for a given season right now usually looks like a coding piece. So again, we actually co-develop a coding assessment with a vendor. So it's, items specific to us. It's a little bit shorter than their off-the-shelf assessment, but otherwise it looks a lot like typical computer-based coding assessments. And then the game-based piece, our typical build would have two modules. They each take about 25, 30 minutes. The first one in the last few years has been designed to measure aspects of creative problem solving. And the second is systems thinking. And so again, they actually are like two discrete games. You get links to take all of these things at the same time, but you don't have to. You can do it over a period of weeks. So the test taker will go in and sort of do these each one at a time. And then, as I mentioned, there's a short survey and a situational judgment task, very short assessment at the end for some personality aspects. But the bulk of it is those game-based cognitive assessments. They are delivered on the Roblox platform. And so one thing we wanted to be sure of is, not everybody may be familiar with Roblox of our applicants. And some people in general just might have anxiety about taking a game-based assessment. I mean, some people honestly have test anxiety about any assessment. And so we actually make a practice test available. We have another Roblox experience. It's a career center where the applicants can go in and experience a virtual version of Roblox. They can listen to some presentations from some of our leaders, but there's a little arcade corner in the back where they can go and basically take a practice version of the assessment and get familiar with the user interface and just generally what it might feel like on test day to take a game-based assessment. And so we found that's been really popular. Generally, our candidate satisfaction is very high. The one of the biggest things that we noticed, compared to the pre-assessment days at Roblox is, this first part of the funnel is completely automated. There's only a couple checks to make sure that they, can work in the United States or are actually new career. Other than that, we don't do any sort of pre-screening on the resumes. And so one thing we've noticed is basically hiring people from much more diverse range of institutions and sort of academic backgrounds, because you don't have to be screened to only come from like a top 50 or top 10 computer science department. You just have to do well on the assessments and you'll move to the next step. And so we have found a number of people that would not have been hired in prior years, and because they would have been likely screened out by a human earlier in the process. And so that's been really interesting. And I've had some of those folks reach out internally just to say, thanks for taking a chance on me. And I said, I didn't. I mean, the system just said you scored very high, and we just pushed you through like anybody else. And so that's been great to see. The biggest challenge I think with this work is if you're going to do it in-house, it's pretty complicated, right? I mean, Roblox, obviously, our CEO Dave Baszucki clearly thought, this was part of his philosophy of taking the long view and really building a very bespoke hiring process for Roblox that reflected the way the way we work. Not everybody's going to want to hire or buy an assessment company or try to build these things in-house for sure. It's not, I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. There are, though, some vendors out there. There are some options. I think the market kind of breaks down into two types of approaches that I've seen. Partly there's so what we do, which I call game-based assessment, where we really do try to build a game. If you look at the team who works on this, they look like a game studio. I've got the game designers and UI UX folks and game engineers, plus our learning scientists and data scientists and the psychometricians, the assessment side. But there are also a bunch of vendors out there that sell something I would call more like gamified assessment. So things that might historically have been like a psychology intervention or experiment that gets sort of a digital game layer put on top of it. So the validity is there. It's like a way to measure people's soft skills from 10, 20, 30 years ago, but with a new, mobile phone interface or something like that. There are a bunch of vendors that offer assessment in sort of a bunch of short little mini games that pick up different aspects of the softer durable skills. And I think those are, they've got a decent bunch of validity evidence, and people can use those in their hiring funnel off the shelf. They don't need to develop those in-house necessarily. When I'm evaluating an assessment, so we do this now, of course, we don't build everything. As I mentioned, we routinely look at what's out there for different technical skills that we might want to measure. What I really want to do is talk to their sort of their psychometricians, right, or their measurement experts who are telling me how their assessment actually works. And so they should be able to provide you, if you're a customer, some evidence of what they've done to validate the assessment, right? How the scores are supposed to work, that the content that is really measuring what they say it's measuring. So I would ask for sort of white papers or technical materials that can show that they've got an internal team that's thought about sort of the things that make an assessment work, and that they haven't just built a game or they haven't just built a test without that. And that's particularly relevant in the startup world, because I run into folks all the time that have a good idea, but they don't realize that there's a whole world of assessment out there that has actually pretty high standards and legal requirements, and you need to understand what how these things work, and they just have a cool idea. So you want to see that they've got somebody who's thought through the assessment side of it and not just the engagement and the entertainment side of it. And usually the way I would recommend evaluating that is to just ask for the technical documentation that they can share, and have either one of your own IO psychologists or people scientists look at it, or if you've got a consultant, make sure that they think it's technically up to snuff.